Hey everyone, my name is Sarah, and in this video, my lab partner Mason will be demonstrating the major bones and sutures of the human skull. As he points them out, I'll briefly explain each structure and its function. By the end of this video, you should be able to identify and describe the main cranial bones and sutures with confidence. So, let's get started. First is the frontal bone, which forms the forehead and the upper part of the eye sockets. It protects the frontal lobe of the brain and helps shape the front portion of the skull. Next is the right parietal bone, which makes up the upper side of the cranium and shields the parietal lobe, which is responsible for processing sensory information like touch and spatial awareness. On the opposite side is the left parietal bone. Together, the parietal bones give the skull its rounded shape and protect the brain from external impact. And here we have the sphenoid bone, a butterfly-shaped structure located at the base of the skull. It connects with multiple cranial and facial points, providing key support to the cranial floor. Moving on to the temporal bone, which is found near the ears on both sides of the skull. It houses the structures of the middle and inner ear and plays an important role in hearing and balance. At the back of the head is the occipital bone, which forms the base and posterior portion of the cranium. It also protects the brain and spinal cord, providing attachment for neck muscles, and connects the skull to the spine, allowing for head movement. Next up is the zygomatic bone, also known as the cheekbone. It gives the face its contour and forms part of the outer wall and floor of the eye socket. Beside it is the frontal process of the maxilla, which articulates with the frontal and nasal bones and primarily functions in providing structural support for the nasal cavity and surrounding facial features. Right next to that is the lacrimal bone, one of the smallest bones in the skull. It contributes to the inner wall of the eye socket and contains the lacrimal fossa, where the tear duct sits. The ethmoid bone can also be seen here, which is responsible for facilitating the sense of smell through the cribriform plate, and protects the brain by separating the cranial and nasal cavities. It also contributes to filtering and humidifying inhaled air and helps lighten the skull's weight. Now let's look at the sutures. The coronal suture separates the frontal bone from the two parietal bones and provides room for the brain to grow rapidly during infancy and childhood. The sagittal suture runs along the midline between the two parietal bones. During birth, the sagittal suture is flexible and allows the two parietal bones to overlap as the baby's head passes through the birth canal, protecting the brain from damage. It also accommodates for rapid brain growth. Squamous suture, which joins the parietal and temporal bones on each side, adds strength to the skull and helps to distribute impact forces evenly across the cranium. Growth at this suture also contributes to the vertical height of the cranium. The lambdoid suture firmly connects the two parietal bones to the occipital bone at the back of the skull. It's responsible for providing a strong fibrous union between the bones, as well as structural integrity to the posterior skull once the bones have fused. Now let's look at the inside. As you can see, the sphenoid bone is easy to spot. It sits centrally at the base of the cranium and connects cranial and facial bones. Because it anchors so many structures, it's often called the keystone bone of the skull. Just in front of it is the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. This thin, perforated surface allows olfactory nerves to pass from the nasal cavity to the brain, making it essential for our sense of smell. Another important feature is the foramen magnum, a large opening at the base of the occipital bone where the spinal cord connects directly to the brainstem. On either side are the occipital condyles, which articulate the first cervical vertebra, allowing the head to nod up and down. Turning the skull back to the front, the maxilla can be seen. This is the upper jawbone that holds the upper teeth and forms part of the orbits and nasal cavity. It plays a major role in facial structure and supports the roof of the mouth. And below that is the mandible, otherwise known as the lower jaw, the only movable bone of the skull. It's responsible for chewing and speaking and connects to the temporal bone at the temporomandibular joint. The vomer bone can also be seen here. It's a thin, flat bone that forms the lower portion of the nasal septum, dividing the nasal cavity into left and right halves to support proper airflow. Then we have the nasal septum, which is primarily responsible for dividing the nasal cavity into two distinct passages, supporting the overall structure of the nose and regulating airflow through the nostrils. It also contributes to the shape of the nose, and its position is critical for the cosmetic and functional integrity of the face. When we flip the skull upside down for an inferior view, the first thing that you'll notice is the palatine bone. which forms the back portion of the hard palate and separates the oral and nasal cavities for clear speech, chewing, and proper swallowing. It also contains important canals and foramina that are responsible for transmitting nerves and blood vessels. Finally, just in front of it, along the midline, the vomer becomes visible once again, extending toward the back of the nasal cavity. Now that we've reviewed the major bones and sutures of the skull, let's test your understanding with a few quick questions. Which bone forms the forehead and the upper portion of the eye sockets? If you said the frontal bone, you are correct. What are the two large bones that form most of the upper sides of the skull and protect the parietal lobes of the brain? If you said the parietal bones, you are correct. Which butterfly-shaped bone forms the base of the cranium and connects the cranial and facial bones? If you said the sphenoid bone, you are correct. Which bone is located on the sides of the skull near the ears and contains structures essential for hearing and balance? If you said the temporal bones, you are correct. Which bone is known as the cheekbone and helps form the lateral wall of the eye socket? If you said the zygomatic bone, you are correct. What tiny bone contributes to the inner wall of the orbit and contains the tear duct area? If you said the lacrimal bone, you are correct. What bone forms the upper jaw, holds the upper teeth, and helps shape the nasal cavity and orbits? If you said the maxilla, you are correct. What is the only movable bone of the skull, responsible for chewing and speaking? If you said the mandible, you are correct. What bone forms the lower part of the nasal septum and separates the nasal cavity into two halves? If you said the vomer, you are correct. What suture separates the frontal bone from the two parietal bones? If you said the coronal suture, you are correct. What suture runs along the midline between the two parietal bones? If you said the sagittal suture, you are correct. What suture connects the parietal bone to the temporal bone on each side? If you said the squamous suture, you are correct. What suture separates the parietal bones from the occipital bone at the back of the skull? If you said the lambdoid suture, you are correct. What bone contains the cribriform plate, allowing olfactory nerves to pass into the cranial cavity? If you said the ethmoid bone, you are correct. Thanks for tuning in to the skull anatomy demonstration. I hope this video helped you visualize the major bones and sutures from multiple angles and understand why each structure is important. Reviewing these landmarks can feel overwhelming, but taking the time to see them clearly on the model really makes everything come together. If you were able to follow along and get the quiz questions right, that's a great sign that you're building strong confidence for your lab exam. Remember to keep practicing with your own model or during open lab hours so these structures become second nature. Thanks again for watching, and I hope this walkthrough made your studying a little bit easier. Good luck, and you've got this.